Welcome back guys to Blackout Warstories. Before we start the video, hit that subscribe button. It's only take a seconds. We launched at dawn, but the sky looked like night. The water was brown and still. Cypress knees rose out of it like bones. I stood near the bow with my rifle slung, watching the grass part ahead of the boat. The air smelled of rot and oil. Our engineer kept tapping the engine cover, muttering about heat. About a mile past the bridge, we saw it. It broke the water slow, like it knew we'd freeze. Its back was slick, shoulders higher than a man's chest. When it turned its head, the light caught its eyes. They were set forward, not to the side. The snout looked like a wolf's but longer. I had heard the word before, from the trappers who drank near the base, Rougarou. It stood half out of the bayou, mud dripping off it, and made no sound at all. Just watched. Then it slid backward and was gone. The water closed smooth like nothing had moved. That was before we found the missing boat, and before the swamp started to feed on us. We were stationed at the Marine barracks across the river from New Orleans, near the Naval Supply Depot. It was summer of '43, and heat hung in the air even before sunrise. I had been in the Corps for 2 years, trained for ship security and coastal watch, not swamp runs. But orders came down fast that morning. 2 civilians from Higgins Industries had gone missing the night before. They were testing a new landing craft on inland waters, said to handle shallow drafts better than any LCBP built so far. It had a flat bow and a lighter frame. They called it Model D. It was supposed to be returned by midnight. By dawn, nothing. A Navy inspector from the yard arrived before breakfast and handed the duty officer a sealed note. He didn't say much, just that we were to form one search detail. We'd move out right after refueling. The rest of the barracks stayed behind, told to say nothing about it. That sort of quiet order was common during the war, especially with anything tied to new equipment. The brass didn't want headlines if civilians got hurt on a Navy test. We loaded into a work skiff built by the same company that made the landing craft. It had a patched hull, a truck motor that rattled when idle, and just enough space for 8 of us, 2 civilians, and our gear. I remember counting rifles twice before we pushed off. Everyone joked at first, mostly to break the tension. The bayou looked harmless enough, just green water and long grass. I had grown up around wetlands farther east, but this felt different. The air was thicker, heavier, and the silence between the insects had weight to it. The inspector sat up front beside the civilians. He wore a tan uniform with no nameplate. The engineers carried a crate marked with red stencil explosives. When one of my men asked why, they said it was for anchoring tests. Nobody argued, though we all knew that made no sense. We were Marines, not fools. You don't bring dynamite on a rescue unless you expect to destroy something. By mid-morning, we cleared the bridge and lost sight of the highway. The river widened, then split into channels. We followed the left fork toward Lake Catherine. Each bend looked the same, trees leaning, water dark as coffee, the smell of decay riding with the wind. Our handy-talkie barely whirred past a few hundred yards, just static and a hum. The corporal on the set kept shaking it like that would help. We tried flares once to test them. They worked fine, bright red. But we learned quick the light drew swarms of insects thick as smoke. At 1100 hours, we reached an old navigation marker leaning in the mud. Beyond it, we found traces of the missing craft, a trail of churned weeds and 2 crushed cattails where a hole had scraped through. The water around the mark was odd bubbled, like something rising below. The engineer took readings from a pole he carried and noted them in a book. He didn't say what they meant. We stopped for lunch near a stand of cypress. Nobody ate much. Sweat soaked every shirt, and the air barely moved. I watched a small alligator slide off a log and thought that would be the worst thing we'd see. I was wrong. At 1300 hours, we pushed farther east and the water deepened. That's when the engine sputtered for the first time. The mechanic blamed weeds on the prop, so we drifted while he cleared it. He leaned over, arm deep in the water. When he pulled his hand out, his wrist was bleeding. Just a scrape, he said, maybe from a shell. But we noticed the shape 3 narrow cuts close together, 2 even for accident. We pressed on another mile before seeing the first sign of blood on the trees. One of the Marines spotted it. dark streaks halfway up a trunk, about chest height. We tied off to inspect. The bark was torn, like something large had struck it sideways. We found part of a torn sleeve wedged under a root. The cloth matched the uniform of one of the missing men. The inspector looked at it, said nothing, then told us to move on. The further we went, the stranger it felt. Birds stopped calling. Even the frogs went silent. The only sound was the steady knock of the hull against submerged roots. Every few minutes, it hit the same rhythm. Tap, pause, tat. We started hearing it even when we weren't moving. Some said it was echo. I wasn't sure. As dusk neared, the grass thickened and the boat slowed. The air smelled wrong, heavy with diesel even though our cans were sealed. One of the engineers sniffed and frowned, said it wasn't their gas. That meant another source, likely from the missing craft. So we kept straight, following the smell like a trail. We spotted a strip of torn canvas snagged on a branch just before dark. The edges were frayed, soaked with oil. A tag on the inside showed Higgins D-test, the same prototype we were hunting. The inspector ordered us to anchor for the night. He didn't want to risk hitting a submerged log in the dark. We tied off to a cypress and set 2 lanterns on the gunwales. That night, the swamp changed. It wasn't quiet anymore. There was movement in the reeds. You could hear water pushing in circles, slow at first, then faster. One of the men said it was gators feeding, but I had seen gators before. They don't move like that. Whatever it was, it made wide loops around us, closing each time. The sound of the hull tapping came back, louder, faster. The inspector gripped his sidearm but said nothing. Around midnight, something nudged the skiff hard from below. The deck shook. The lanterns rattled. Then silence. We stood there, rifles ready, waiting for another hit. None came. The water flattened again, smooth as glass. By morning, one man was gone. His rifle lay near the stern. No sign of him. Just wet footprints on the deck, ending at the rail. We searched the water at first light. No bubbles, no ripples. Nothing to show he had ever been there. I sent 2 men waist deep with lines tied to their belts. The mud swallowed their boots and came up black. They pulled out a belt, the missing man's name still stenciled on the inside. One strap was torn clean through. The edge looked chewed, not cut. The inspector ordered us to stop searching and move east. His voice shook when he said it, though he tried to hide it. He claimed the missing man must have slipped and drowned. I had seen drownings before, bodies float after a while. This felt different. The rest of us said nothing. We packed the deck, checked ammo, and went back to the engine. The mechanic said the motor sounded rough. It coughed whenever we throttled past half. He blamed bad fuel, though the gas came straight from the depot. When we restarted, the exhaust smoked heavy, and that snow, the thick, stale diesel rolled in stronger than before. It was sharp enough to burn the nose. The engineer took one look around, muttered about chemical runoff, and told us to keep moving fast. He never explained what kind. The map showed a narrow cut ahead, marked Bayou Sauvage Spur. The missing test craft had been scheduled to run through it before returning. The channel was too tight for our skiff, but we followed it anyway, using oars to keep from hitting roots. Sunlight barely reached through the canopy. The water changed color, turning darker, almost black. That was when we found the first footprint. It sat in the mud at the edge of the bank, bare, wide, toe spread, deeper at the heel. The print faced the tree line, not the water. One of my men pointed out claw marks ahead, 3 straight lines scratched into the bark. The inspector looked at them long and said, "We keep this between us." Then he ordered us to keep quiet about the tracks in the report. We reached open water again by midday. The bay widened, and the smell grew stronger. Floating on the edge of the reeds was a patch of wreckage, fiberglass chunks, bits of a ramp hinge, a section of torn rope. We lifted them aboard. One piece had metal grooves shaped like teeth marks. Not the round kind an alligator makes, but long and flat, as if crushed by rows of jagged plates. The engineers argued in low voices. One kept insisting the prototype's hull couldn't have been breached by wildlife. The other said it might have been a chemical leak that weakened the frame. The inspector said nothing. He just watched the water like it might rise any moment. We decided to follow the slick east, where the smell thickened and the reeds opened into a shallow lagoon. That was where we saw the ramp. It was raised halfway out of the mud, half submerged, tilted at an angle. The letters HDAO1 still showed faint through the grime. One of the engineers shouted that it was their missing craft. We tied off and waded to it. The mud pulled at our legs. The ramp was locked halfway down, as if it had jammed mid-drop. The inside of the hole looked burned, streaked black near the stern. The radio mount was ripped loose, wires hanging out like vines. No crew, no papers, just bones scattered near the bow, small, pale, stripped clean. The inspector took one look and told everyone to back out. He ordered the engineers to take photos and samples, then told me to burn the site if we could not tow it. I didn't argue, though I didn't understand why. He made it sound like command wanted no trace left. We tied a rope around the stern and tried to pull it free. The hole shifted but didn't move. That's when the water around the bow rippled. Something brushed my leg, heavy, like a log, but moving on purpose. I stepped back and called out. The surface broke, just a few yards off. A head rose from the water. It was the same shape I'd seen the day before. Snout long, eyes front, body slick with mud and black water. Its shoulders came up, muscles showing under the film. I could see breath fog from its nose. It didn't growl or make sound, it just stared. Then another shape surfaced behind it. Then a third. All in a line, slow, waiting. The inspector whispered something under his breath. One of the Marines opened fire too soon. 3 shots from his M1 cracked through the air, echoing off the cypress. The creature slid under, in silence. No blood, no splash. Just gone. The lagoon stilled again, except for that faint knock, the sound of the skiff's hull tapping against something unseen below. The inspector yelled at the shooter, but his voice broke halfway. We all knew it wasn't panic we could hide now. We climbed back to the skiff, cut the line, and drifted backward out of the lagoon. I watched the ramp vanish behind us. For a moment, I thought I saw something move across it, a dark outline walking upright before dropping to all fours. We didn't speak for a long time. Only the sound of that tapping kept us company, faint and steady. By the time we reached clearer water, the sun had dipped low and the sky turned copper. The inspector gave one final order. We'd camp for the night in an old trapper's shack about a mile ahead, reachable by a narrow run. He said it was safer there than open water. None of us argued. We just wanted dry ground, even if it wasn't much. As we motored toward it, the smell of rot followed us, thicker now, mixing with our own fuel. The engineer whispered that the creatures had learned to follow the scent of oil. I didn't know what to believe, but every man kept his rifle tight in his grip. By the time we saw the shack through the trees, night was already closing in. The roof sagged, but it stood high enough to keep us above water. We tied off and climbed the ladder one at a time, rifles first. The boards creaked but held. From up there you could see the black line of the swamp stretching forever. None of us knew it yet, but that shack would be the last solid place we'd stand before the swamp decided who stayed and who didn't. We reached the shack at dusk. The ladder swayed with every step and the boards flexed under our boots. The place looked ready to fall, but it was the only ground higher than water. We dropped packs, stacked rifles in a corner, and checked each other's faces. No one said it, but we all looked older than we had that morning. The inspector took the upper corner near the window. He unrolled a map and marked the lagoon's location in pencil. When I asked if he'd report the creatures, he didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You saw nothing that can be explained." That was his exact line. It meant don't talk. We'd been through enough briefings to know that tone. Outside, the light faded fast. The swamp went quiet again. The knocking sound from the hull had stopped when we tied up, but now it came back, faint and steady, like something brushing the stilts. The engineer started to check the floorboards, but I told him to leave it. Better not to know until daylight. We set 2 lanterns low and 1 guard by the ladder. The night air pressed in. The smell of oil still drifted through, even though our cans were sealed. It mixed with something worse, sweet and rotten, like meat left too long in the sun. One of the men vomited over the rail. The sound carried, and for a few seconds the swamp answered back, with small ripples moving outward. I took first watch. The stars showed between the clouds, and the water reflected them, still as a mirror. I tried not to blink much. Every time I did, it felt like something shifted below. Around midnight, the sound started again. Slow pushes of water against the stilts, then a scrape, like claws on wood. I kept the rifle ready but didn't fire. When my watch ended, I woke the next man. He was younger, from Kansas, fresh out of training. I told him to keep low and stay quiet. Half an hour later, he shouted. I spun and saw him leaning over the rail, pointing at the water. A dark shape was moving in circles below, wide as a car hood. He fired once, and the bullet splashed without a sound back. Then nothing. We held our breath. The inspector came over, furious but whispering, "You'll bring them in." He was right. Sound carried far. We waited, tense, for return movement. After a minute, the water went calm again. The young Marine's hands shook so bad I had to take his rifle. By dawn, we had no sleep. The swamp fog was thick and you could taste it. We decided to move back toward the river, but the motor wouldn't start. The mechanic pulled the cover and found the fuel line half cut, like sliced with a blade. Only no one had a knife that sharp. We patched it with tape and spare tubing, but I kept wondering who or what had been close enough to do that without sound. Before leaving, the inspector ordered a search around the shack. We found drag marks in the mud below, long and heavy, like something big had circled through during the night. The stilts themselves were scratched deep on one side. It looked deliberate. I measured the spacing of the gouges, about 6 inches apart, same as the claw marks on that tree back near the cut. We left fast. The motor finally caught after 5 pulls. The water near the shack rippled wide as we backed off, as if something large moved just beneath. No one wanted to look too close. By midday, we were back near the main channel. The sun baked the surface and raised steam, making it hard to see more than a few yards. The smell of diesel had spread even here. We followed the slick east again, hoping it led to open water. The inspector kept scanning the tree line, whispering notes under his breath. We passed a set of barrels half sunk in mud. They were painted gray, no markings visible. One had split open, leaking black sludge that bubbled as it hit the water. The engineer said it might be waste from testing, nothing dangerous. But the fish floating around it told another story. The further we went, the more we saw dead birds, a deer half submerged, the same black film on their bodies. Whatever had been dumped there had eaten through the life around it. The creatures we saw must have come up feeding on that. I didn't say that out loud. It didn't need saying. Late that afternoon, we stopped at another small rise of dry ground to rest. The men were tired, eyes red, hands blistered from rowing when the motor faltered. We counted ammo again. 2 clips short from the last firing, 1 grenade lost overboard. We had 1 radio battery left. Still no reply. The young Marine sat apart, muttering that he'd seen eyes under the water when we left the shack. I didn't argue. I'd seen them too. Greenish, low, tracking the skiff. The inspector pretended not to hear. He kept flipping through his field notes, whispering numbers. I caught a few depths, distances, speeds, all logged exact. Like this was another test, not a rescue. As evening came, the swamp turned quiet again. The same tapping started, slow and steady against the hull. This time it was higher pitched, like something brushing metal. The mechanic leaned over with a flashlight. The beam hit movement. A hand, no, a paw with fingers touched the side of the skiff and slid away. The nails left thin lines along the paint. We didn't move or speak. Just watched the water where it vanished. Then the surface broke a few feet off, and a face rose halfway. Mud clung to it, masking most of the features except those eyes. Yellow, fixed, unblinking. The Rougarou. It didn't charge. It watched, then sank slow. The ripples spread wide, rocking the boat. The engineer whispered that maybe the noise drew it. I told him to stay quiet. Everyone gripped their rifles tighter. The inspector ordered no firing unless attacked. We backed the skiff away with oars, too afraid to run the motor again. The sound of the hull knocking followed us, each hit closer than the last. It felt like the swamp itself was breathing under us. We reached another clearing by dark. This one wider, calmer, but the air carried that same sour stench. We anchored in the middle, hoping the depth would keep whatever was below from reaching up. The lantern stayed off. We sat in the dark, rifles ready, counting the seconds between each knock. The inspector leaned toward me and said softly, "They're hunting in pairs now." I didn't ask how he knew. He just stared at the water, lips tight, like a man waiting on something he already feared. Then, from the fog behind us, came the first real sound, not a knot this time. A wet breath, long, heavy, dragging through the air. It came from near the engine. I raised my rifle but couldn't see past the mist. The sound stopped. Then came another from the other side. Two of them, just as he said. And that's when the engine cover moved. The mechanic froze beside the motor. The lid had lifted an inch on its own, just enough for steam to escape. He whispered that it might be pressure. Then it lifted again, slow and careful, like fingers pushing from beneath. We all backed toward the bow. The inspector aimed his sidearm but didn't fire. The lid fell open. A shape rose from the water beside the stern, half hidden by fog. It wasn't climbing fast, just steady, like it knew we were too scared to act. The face came first. Gray skin stretched tight, eyes bright against the dark. Its chest broke the surface next, broad and slick. I remember the way the light caught the water sliding off its shoulders. The mechanic fired first, 3 rounds point blank from his pistol. The shots echoed, and the creature jerked once but didn't fall. It leaned forward, grabbed the side rail, and yanked. The wood split. The skiff tilted hard to port. 2 men went over. The rest of us dropped to our knees to keep balance. I grabbed the young Marine by the collar as he slipped, pulling him back. One of the engineers screamed that something was under him. Then he vanished. The water boiled for a moment, then stilled. I fired into the bubbles, hoping to hit something, anything. The shots made no difference. We heard the inspector shouting orders, but I couldn't make out the words. The engine caught on by accident when someone hit the throttle. The skiff jerked forward, throwing everyone against the sides. The creature let go and disappeared beneath the wake. We moved fast, no one steering, just praying not to hit a stump. When we slowed, only 6 of us were left aboard. The engineer was gone, and the mechanic lay bleeding from his shoulder where a piece of splintered wood had hit. The inspector looked pale, sweat running down his face despite the night air. He said we'd head back to the shack. I didn't argue. We needed cover even if it was falling apart. The route back was worse. Fog had settled thick over the water, and the tapping came again, this time from both sides at once. I could see small wakes crossing ahead of us, moving fast and low. Whatever they were, they knew the channels better than we did. We reached the shack near dawn. The stilts still stood, but the water around them looked disturbed, full of churned mud. We tied up fast and climbed the ladder. The boards were wet, like something had come up earlier and dripped everywhere. Inside, we set the wounded man down and cleaned the gash with what was left of the first aid kit. He didn't talk much after that. The inspector gathered us and said we'd wait for daylight, then head south to the main river. He claimed help would be waiting. I knew he was lying. The radio still wouldn't pick up anything, and the way he avoided our eyes told me command had cut contact long before. We ate what rations we had left, hard biscuits and a few tins of meat. The young Marine didn't touch his food. He kept staring at the swamp below, whispering numbers to himself. At first, I thought he was praying. Then I realized he was counting the knocks against the hull. He stopped at 43. That's when the sound stopped too. It stayed quiet for almost an hour. Just whined through the grass. Then something big hit the stilts. The whole shack shook. Boards creaked. The lantern swung on its hook, throwing light across our faces. I ran to the rail and looked down. The water was frothing. Something was ramming the posts. Each strike was harder than the last. The inspector shouted for us to hold fire until we saw a target. That didn't last long. The young Marine emptied a full clip into the water, shouting. When his rifle jammed, I dragged him back before he fell through the gap between boards. His eyes looked wild, like he'd already seen his own end. Then, for the first time, we saw more than one creature clearly. The fog shifted just right, and the light hit them. 2 no, 3 moving in the shallows. Their backs broke the surface like black logs, but their heads were wrong. Long snouts, forward eyes, shoulders that rolled like men. They moved upright for a few seconds, pushing through reeds, then dropped low again, swimming fast. The inspector ordered everyone to conserve ammo. He said they'd lose interest by daylight. But daylight came, and they were still there, circling, always just beyond clear view. We could hear them breathing. Long, slow exhales that stirred the fog. By late morning, the wounded mechanic was fading. His breathing went shallow, and his skin turned pale. We had no morphine left. He tried to speak once, but only managed a rasp. When the inspector checked his pulse, it was gone. We didn't have time to bury him. We wrapped his body in a tarp and set him on a beam near the edge, covered with our spare ponchos. The young Marine whispered that leaving the body out would draw them in. He was right. Before noon, the water near the beam started to bubble. A shape rose, then another. They pulled the tarp down and vanished with it. The beam rocked for a long time after. We never saw the mechanic again. The inspector's calm broke after that. He cursed command, said they should have sent real boats, not a handful of guards. The remaining engineer told him to keep his voice down, or they'll hear. Nobody laughed at that. We decided to make a run for it at dusk. The plan was simple. Pour fuel into the shallows, light it, and use the fire as cover to get back to open water. The inspector said if we couldn't reach the main river by dark, we'd hold in the reeds until sunrise. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. As the sun dropped, we poured the gasoline. The smell was overwhelming, strong enough to sting the eyes. We waited until the light dimmed, then struck a flare and threw it. Fire spread quick, orange lines running along the grass. The creatures surfaced, thrashing at the edges, caught between flame and smoke. That gave us our chance. We untied the skiff and pushed off hard. The fire's glow turned the water red behind us. For the first time, I thought maybe we'd make it. Then something slammed into the hull from below. The impact threw 2 men overboard. One surfaced, the other didn't. I fired where he'd gone under. Nothing came up. The inspector shouted to keep moving. The engine groaned, but held. We steered through the smoke, coughing, eyes burning. Behind us, the shack collapsed, one leg at a time, until the roof slid under. The sound of that tapping followed us even then, faint but steady, like something swimming under the hole, waiting for another chance. We didn't know it yet, but what we'd seen in that smoke wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something none of us would be allowed to speak about again. At dawn, we drifted clear of the smoke. The fire we'd set had burned itself into patches of ash on the water. The air smelled like rusted fuel and cooked mud. No sound of pursuit, just a steady drone of insects returning after silence. We were down to 5 men now, 2 engineers dead, 1 missing, 1 Marine gone under. The inspector looked hollow, his uniform blackened, sidearms still drawn. He said we'd done enough, that the swamp was closing over its own secrets. But I knew he wasn't done. He stared at the map again, tracing the route where the missing prototype had gone before we found it. Then he said something strange. There were other runs before this one. He explained while keeping his voice low. The company had tested the craft here for weeks, not days. They used bait dogs, sometimes pigs, to check how the hull reacted to stress under impact. They'd noticed animals disappearing from traps, not running away, just gone. The engineers thought it was poachers, but one night they saw movement in the lights, shapes walking upright through the reeds. That was when the Navy sent him in, not to recover, but to confirm. I asked what he meant by confirm. He said, that something is breeding out here. The words sank deep. We thought the Rougarou were stories, superstition from Cajun fishermen. But now it sounded like they were known, classified, maybe even studied. The inspector looked sick when he said the word breeding. We stopped near a stretch of open marsh to clean the rifles and refuel. I took the chance to check the hull. There were scratches along the bottom, new ones, running the full length. The grooves looked deliberate, parallel, spaced evenly like claws. I ran my fingers along them and felt the faint vibration of something beneath, moving slow, steady. The young Marine called out from the bow. He'd found the chain under the water, thick as a wrist, leading off into the grass. It wasn't rusted, which meant it had been placed recently. We followed it on foot for a few yards until it ended at a half-sunken metal grate. The mud around it was churned, as if something large had pushed through. The inspector dropped to one knee and brushed the edge clean. There was a number stenciled faintly into the metal, N47. His face went pale. He said it was a restricted storage pit meant for hazardous disposal. The drums we'd seen earlier must have been dumped from here. He said the runoff could have mutated anything that fed on it. Fish, gator, maybe something else. I could tell he was guessing, but his voice broke when he said it. We heard a splash, then quick, sharp close. Everyone froze. Ripples spread near the grate. Then the chain moved on its own, sliding taut, pulling into the hole like something was drawing it in from below. We backed up slow, rifles raised, watching as the last link vanished. The water went still again. The inspector said nothing for a long time. Then he told us to move toward the rigolets, where the current might carry us out to open water. But when we turned the skiff, the motor wouldn't start again. The engineer's toolbox lay open, and a part of the ignition coil was gone. Clean removed, not broken. We were stranded. The inspector said we'd use the current and drift east until we found a deeper channel. We started paddling with broken boards. The sun rose high, burning through fog, showing a flat stretch of reeds that seemed endless. After a while, we began to see shapes floating ahead. Fragments of hulls, bits of uniforms, an oar, a canteen. I counted 3 helmets before realizing none were ours. The inspector said the company had lost earlier teams. They were written off as training accidents. The Navy filed no records. The young Marine asked how many. The inspector said 3 runs, 9 men. He didn't meet our eyes. We found a sandbar around midday and pulled up to rest. The smell hit first strong, like rotted fish and fuel. The ground trembled slightly underfoot, like the vibration of a distant engine. Then the inspector noticed a dark mound at the far end of the bar. We walked over, rifles ready. It wasn't a rock. It was the carcass of one of those creatures, half burned from our fire. Up close, the skin was rough, scaled in parts, but stretched like leather over bones too long for its body. Its mouth was full of teeth like broken glass. The chest was open, not torn but cut, as if someone had opened it with tools. Inside were metal tags, pieces of wiring, and a badge from Higgins Industries. The inspector stared at it, jaw tight. He said someone had been studying them, maybe feeding them, maybe both. We all stood there in silence. The young Marine whispered that the body wasn't cold. I touched it with my rifle barrel. He was right, it was still warm. That was when the water beside the bar rose. Slow at first, then fast. A shape pushed up larger than any before. It wasn't gray like the others. It was darker, almost black, with streaks of red across its shoulders. The dead one hadn't drawn them away. It had called them back. We ran for the skiff, slipping on the mud. The inspector fell but caught himself on the rail. I fired twice behind us, saw nothing but spray. As we pushed off, the dark one lunged from the water, hitting the sand where we'd just stood. Its weight cracked the ground. Its eyes found us through the glare, yellow and unblinking. The inspector fired his pistol until it clicked empty. The creature didn't flinch. It watched us drift, sinking back into the water inch by inch. Only when we were 50 yards out did it turn and vanish, leaving a long wake that didn't break until the horizon. We didn't speak for a long time after that. The inspector just said one thing, almost to himself: we were never meant to come back. That was when I realized this wasn't rescue. It was containment. We drifted for hours, the current slow and aimless. The sun hung low, red through the haze. Every man was quiet. Even the inspector had stopped pretending to lead. The young Marine kept staring at the water, mumbling the same few words over and over. It learns fast. I didn't ask what he meant. The skiff scraped a line of reeds and slowed. The water there was shallow, thick with roots and debris. Ahead, I saw a narrow break, maybe a way through to open water. I took the pole and pushed us forward. That was when the smell hit again, diesel and rot, stronger than before. I looked back and saw a thin slick spreading behind us. The tank cap was gone. Someone had pulled it free. The fuel drained fast, trailing behind like a signal fire on the surface. The inspector's face went white. He shouted for everyone to grab paddles. We moved hard, but the current was wrong. It pulled back toward the slick, not forward. The young Marine said softly, "They're pushing water." I felt it too, the drag under the hull, rising from below. Then it came up. The water split beside the skiff, wide and sudden. A Rougarou burst through, half out of the swamp, taller than the rail. Its shoulders hit the side, flipping the boat nearly over. I fell backward, the rifle slamming into my chest. The creature's face was inches away, skin stretched, teeth long, eyes bright with a strange calm. It opened its mouth, and the smell of blood and oil poured over me. I fired from the hip, 3 rounds straight into its chest. The sound was deafening. It didn't drop. It just leaned closer, pushing against the shots until the 4th hit something vital. Then it fell backward, dragging the skiff with it. We rolled into the water. Everything turned chaos. Mud filled my mouth. The world was noise and thrashing. I surfaced once, saw the inspector pulling at the engine rope. The young Marine was gone. The creature's body floated beside the hull, twitching. Then another wake formed behind it. A second one, faster. I climbed back in, coughing, grabbed the BAR, and fired into the waterline. The rounds tore through something solid. A shape jerked sideways and sank. The inspector got the engine running on half fuel. The skiff surged forward, bouncing off hidden roots. Behind us, the water erupted. 3 wakes now, close, weaving through reeds like trained animals. The inspector yelled to keep fire low, aimed behind, and emptied his sidearm. The creatures didn't fall back. They followed, darting side to side, herding us toward the deeper channel. I saw the plan forming. The current would funnel us right into the cut where we'd found the first tracks. It wasn't pursuit, it was control. We broke through into a wider bay. The smoke from earlier fires drifted across, turning everything gray. The creatures spread out behind, moving in arcs. They were driving us into open water, away from the shallows, towards something waiting. That's when we saw it. The remains of the prototype, HD-01, burned but still afloat. Its ramp was down again, even though we'd seen it jam before. Something about the sight made my stomach turn. The inspector looked at me, realization plain on his face. "They brought it back," he said. The hull rocked, hitting a submerged object. The engine sputtered. I tried to keep balance, but the skiff turned broadside to the current. That's when a dark shape rose under the prototype, larger than any before. It pushed the burned hull upward like it weighed nothing. The metal creaked, then split. Something inside the ramp moved ahead, then 2. Smaller ones, leaner, crawling out through the opening. The inspector raised his pistol, hands shaking. I shouted to aim for the ramp, not the water. We fired together, bullets punching through the frame, sending sparks across the metal. The smaller creatures scattered, sliding down the sides. But the big one stayed under, steady, holding the wreck upright. The young Marine's voice came from the stern, distant, frightened. "It's not one of them. It's all of them." Then he screamed. I turned, but he was already gone, pulled straight over the side. A handprint smeared in blood marked where he'd stood. The inspector tried to steer us clear. I saw panic break through the control he'd carried since day one. "We finished this," he said. "No one else finds them." He reached for the last satchel charge the engineer had brought, the one we hadn't used. He wired it fast, clipped the timer, and looked at me. "Get us close." We headed straight toward the wreck. The creatures moved in the shallows on both sides, keeping pace. I could hear the motor straining, fuel nearly gone. The inspector waited until we were within a few yards, then hurled the satchel into the open ramp. It hit hard, rolling inside. He started counting under his breath. I grabbed his arm. "You'll never clear it." He didn't answer. The timer ticked louder than the engine. The explosion hit before he reached 3. The blast ripped the air apart, a wall of sound and heat. The prototype shattered, throwing pieces across the water. I went under again, lungs burning. The shockwave threw me clear of the skiff. When I surfaced, the bay was fire and smoke. The skiff was half sunk, the inspector gone. The water around the wreck boiled. For a few seconds, I saw outlines moving through the flame. Tall, fast, then still, then nothing. Just a crackle of burning oil. I clung to the broken hull, coughing, ears ringing. The smell of diesel and blood filled the air, thicker than ever. The current pulled me east, toward the rigolets. I let it take me. Behind, the swamp went silent again. The creatures didn't follow. Not then. But the silence felt worse than the noise. Like the swamp had swallowed its own secret again. The fire drifted west with the wind, leaving a path of glowing slicks. The air was too hot to breathe right. I lay across a half-burned plank from the skiff, letting the current carry me. My hand shook too bad to hold the rifle steady, so I strapped it across my back. The barrel burned my shoulder, but I didn't care. The sky above was gray from smoke, no sun left, just light fading behind clouds. When the noise settled, I realized I could still hear the water moving under me, steady and slow, like breath drawn through a throat. I looked around. Bits of wood floated, bits of canvas too. One of the engineer's packs drifted by, open, papers curling at the edges. I caught it, hoping for something useful, maybe a flare. Inside were photographs. Grainy, taken at night, showing the prototypes on earlier runs. But one photo made me stop. It showed a dark figure standing in the reeds beside the craft, upright, watching the men on deck. The back of the print was stamped, "Do not release." I dropped it into the water. Some things didn't need to be carried any farther. By the time I reached clear water, the fire had faded. I saw the bridge far ahead, Chef Menteur, the same one we'd crossed days before. For a moment I thought I was safe. Then I noticed movement near the pylons. A shape slid along the pilings, half hidden by shadows. It wasn't gone after all. One of them had followed. I kicked weakly, trying to angle away, but my body felt heavy, numb from cold and exhaustion. The shape followed slow, keeping distance. I could see only the top of its head, like a dark fin gliding. It didn't rush me. It was waiting. I spotted a small dock along the shore, half collapsed but still standing. I paddled for it, using the plank like a board. Every stroke made pain shoot through my arms. The dock stayed stubbornly far. The shade came closer. When it was 20 feet away, I saw its eyes break the surface, bright and steady. I aimed the rifle one-handed and fired. The shot missed, hitting the water in front. The echo rolled out across the bay. The shape vanished, and for a few seconds I thought I'd scared it off. Then the dock shuddered. The creature had gone under it. I grabbed the piling and hauled myself up, barely making the deck. My boots slipped on wet boards. I crawled forward, gasping. From below came a thud, then another. The whole dock swayed. The creature was pushing from underneath. I found a rusted fuel can near the edge, half full. I didn't think. I just ripped the cap and poured it through the gaps in the planks. The smell hit hard. I struck my last flare and dropped it. Fire rolled under the boards, hissing across the slick. The creature hit once more, then stopped. The heat rose through the wood, smoke blinding me. I backed off until the dock's far end, ready to dive if it collapsed. The fire burned down to coals, then out. The water below bubbled once, then went still. I waited minutes before looking over. Nothing. Only black water and ashes. When daylight came, I was still there, half asleep on the dock. My rifle was gone. My clothes were stiff with salt and soot. A small boat came up the channel. A Coast Guard cutter. 2 men leaned over, shouting. I couldn't answer. I just lifted a hand. They pulled me aboard, wrapped me in a blanket, and asked where my unit was. I said, "Gone." They took me back to Algiers Station. The medics checked my lungs, said I'd swallowed half the swamp. The officer on duty kept asking what happened to the others. I told him we'd lost contact in the fire. He asked about the prototype. I said it sank. He looked at me for a long time, then nodded, as if that was the answer he'd been told to expect. Later that night, 2 men in plainclothes came to the infirmary. One carried a folder marked, Incident Report 47B. They asked for my weapon serial, the list of men present, and every detail from the mission. I gave what I could, but when I mentioned what we'd seen, they stopped writing. The older one said, "Those are local tales. Nothing verified." I told him I didn't care if it was verified. He just smiled thinly and said, "You'll sign the report as written." The final version said, "Attack by alligator. Hull destroyed by internal explosion. 3 men missing, presumed drowned. No mention of creatures. No mention of drums or photos." I signed it. Refusing wouldn't change a thing. They discharged me 2 weeks later. The inspector's body was never recovered. The file closed fast. Higgins moved night tests out to Gulf waters. The swamp stayed quiet again. But I know what I saw. And sometimes when the air gets heavy and the wind shifts east, I smell that same diesel rot, faint but real, like the swamp breathing from under the earth. I stayed in the hospital 4 days. The doctor said I had water in my lungs and burns across my arms. They didn't ask where they came from. Orders had already passed down. No visitors, no letters, no talk. The other Marines from our barracks acted like the mission never happened. When I finally left, my sea bag was lighter than before. My field notes, the handy talkie, even the spare compass gone. The only thing left was the torn piece of canvas I'd tied around my wrist that night, stained with oil. They hadn't noticed it. I kept it tucked deep in my pocket. A few weeks later, I was called to a quiet room at the yard. 2 officers were there. They said they were closing the report. The prototype was officially lost during test conditions. No search recovery. They wanted confirmation that the explosion had been accidental. I said yes. One of them slid a paper across the table already written. I signed it. The conversation ended. I thought that would be it. But that night, while walking back to the barracks, I passed the maintenance dock. A crate stood on the platform, marked for transport to Pensacola. The stenciled number was clear, HD-A-DO-2. Not lost, not cancelled, built again. I stopped and looked at it for a long time. The guard nearby told me to move along. He didn't meet my eyes when he said it. The swamp was miles away, but I could feel it still, sitting behind every quiet order and sealed file. Somewhere out there under the black water, those things were waiting, and someone higher up had decided they were worth keeping. I turned away and walked back into the dark, carrying the smell of diesel and the memory of what watched us from that bay. 2 months later, I was transferred north for training duty. No one mentioned Louisiana again. The inspector's name never came up in any roll call. His file was gone, like he had never served. When I asked about him once, my new commanding officer said, "Different posting," and changed the subject. At night, I dream of that knocking sound against the hull. It always came in pairs, 2 taps, then silence, like something reminding me it was still there. The smell of diesel sometimes woke me. I'd check my hands, half expecting to see the black film again. Years passed. I left the Corps after the war. Took a job at a shipyard, married once, kept to quiet places. Still, anytime a storm came off the Gulf, I'd watch the news. If a boat went missing in the marsh, I'd listen for details. No bodies, strange damage, sudden silence on the radio. There were more of those stories than anyone noticed. One spring, around 51, I drove back down that way. The road to the bridge was rebuilt, new signs, more houses. But the air still carried that same smell. I stopped near the waterline where we'd launched years before. The bayou looked calm, nothing out of place. Then I saw a ripple moving against the wind, slow and deliberate. Not a gator, not a log. I stayed just long enough to know I wasn't imagining it. Then I turned and walked away. Some things you don't chase twice. I still have the small tooth I kept from that mission. It sits in a box with my old ribbons. When light hits it, the surface shines like metal, edges smooth where it scraped the hull. I never told anyone about it. Some truth served no good being spoken. That swamp took men and kept it secret. But I know what's waiting under that water. It was never myth. It was born from what we built and what we spilled. And someday, when the river runs high again, it'll rise with it. It's been more than 30 years since that swamp took my squad. I still remember every sound, the water lapping, the soft thud against the hull, and the quiet after gunfire stopped. people like to say time dulls memory. They're wrong. It just hides sharper parts until the right smell or sound brings them back. Sometimes I drive down near the coast when the fog rolls in. The air feels the same. The water looks the same. I stand on the edge, watching the ripples form and fade, wondering if one of those shapes is still out there, carrying a bit of what we left behind. The Navy buried that mission deep, but not deep enough. Places remember what men try to forget. I never hated the swamp. It wasn't evil. It was just following what it had been turned into. We poured poison and noise into its veins, and it answered back in kind. I've kept my silence all these years, but I know this much: what lives under that water was never meant to die there. If anyone goes looking, go armed, and don't go twice. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And for more amazing horror stories, just click the ones showing right now on your screen.